Welcome to my channel. I hope you're well today because I have a sewing project to share with you, and in this week's video I'm going to be showing you how to sew a tea dress using the Etoile pattern. I think that's how you pronounce it, please do correct me if I am wrong, by French Poetry. And French Poetry are an independent sewing pattern company that do PDF patterns that you can download at home, print it off and then stick together yourself and get away with sewing. So the Etoile tea dress is a beautiful dress. It has a gathered puffed tie sleeve as well as a button down front, and it just sits beautifully. It's really nice and comfortable. So if you would like to see the making of a tea dress, then let's get sewing. So here is the cutting and sewing instructions for the Etoile dress, and this comes in the pack with the PDF download, and you can see in the background I have already got the pattern pieces ready to go. And then my fabric of choice is this beautiful viscose. It's a lovely pale blue with daisy print to it, and it is from Minerva Fabrics. And as you can see, it is a lightweight viscose and it has a little bit of see-throughness, but you can't see through it once the dress is on. But it is very lightweight and a little bit slippery to sew. I found it slipping under the sewing machine, but it's a beautiful fabric nonetheless. So let's get on to making the tea dress. So the first thing to do is to pin all the pattern pieces in the right place on the fabric. Some are cut on the fold, some are cut on their own. So I'm just pinning and cutting them out here. So the dress is only made up of a few pieces. You have the back bodice, which is one piece cut on the fold, two front bodice pieces, two sleeves, a front facing and a bit for where in between the shoulders for that facing, as well as the sleeve ties. And you will need interfacing as well for the facing, which is what I am adhering to the facing piece here on the wrong side. And this will just give it a little bit of stability where the buttons and buttonholes will be down the front of the dress. And I cut my finger whilst I was cutting out this fabric, so do be careful if you are using a rotary cutter, because, you know, common sense, I kept my finger in the way of the blade and ended up cutting it, so do be careful. And then it is time to start sewing. So what I've done here is marked out the darts on the front bodice pieces. Now this consists of two darts, does this dress. There is the bust darts and the waist darts, and it is the first time I've actually sewn waist darts in any project, so I hope I have done them correctly. So what you want to do is mark on where the pattern piece indicates the bust dart and waist darts to be with some tailor's chalk, and then pin these in place. You basically fold them up so it's like a fold in the material, and sew down the marked line, running the thread off of the end and then just tying this in a double knot to secure it. I think I do back stitch here, and ideally you shouldn't really back stitch, I don't think, but do correct me if I am wrong. So then repeating the same on both bodice pieces for the bust darts and the waist darts, and this is what they should look like on the back of the fabric. As with any sewing project, it's important to have your iron on standby, so I am just pressing out the darts that have just been sewn, and this helps setting the stitches as well as setting them darts. And then along the neckline, because it is a deep V, I am just adding a thin strip of fusible interface into this just to add some stability, because the neckline can distort in shape if you're not too careful. And just to make sure that it does stay in place, I am doing a stay stitch, which is just a simple stitch all along that open neckline. And once this is done, it is time to place the front bodice pieces to the back bodice pieces right sides together, pinning at the shoulders and the side seams, and then we're just going to connect all together. So sewing a seam across the two shoulder seams and then following down the two side seams. After this, it is time to compile the facing for the dress. Now the facing is made up of three parts. One that goes across the back of the neck and shoulders, then it connects two front pieces that go down the front of the neckline and the front of the dress where the buttons and buttonholes will be. So we need to connect these together using a simple straight stitch, back stitching the start and end to secure the two front pieces to that one back piece. Then it's time to attach this facing to the dress. So what we're going to do is pin it all along the back of the neckline, going down the front of the neckline and then down the two open pieces of the front bodices, pinning this in place with lots of pins. It is a little bit fiddly to do, just making sure it's all lined up properly, then sewing a simple stitch to connect them all together. And the pattern piece does indicate where there are notches so that you can line these up. And once this is sewn and attached, it's time to give it a press out to help set in them stitches, and then fold it inwards towards the dress, and this will just give it a really nice clean edge to the openings of the dress. Pressing this in place again, then jumping back on the sewing machine and doing a top stitch along as close as possible to that edge to secure the facing down in place so it doesn't flap back out. Now this part was a little bit fiddly to do, so I will link down below French Poetry's tutorial on how to add a tab to the open slit of sleeves, because it is a little bit complicated. I found it complicated and I had to watch this video a few times. So basically you're attaching a rectangle piece of material, the tab, to cover the slit and enclose all of the raw edges of the slit, and it just gives the opening of the sleeves a really nice finished look. So you pin the rectangle to that V shape, but it won't go into a full V shape, but you still sew it along this way. Then once it's attached, you then fold it in on itself, creating a little hem so that it encloses the slit. I don't think I'm explaining this very well, but yes, check out French Poetry's version of how to do this, and it does look nice and neat once it is done. To give the sleeves a nice puffy look, you need to do a little bit of gathering. So here I am just doing 2 rows of gathering stitches as indicated on the top curve of the sleeve, and then a little bit on the bottom edge of the sleeve, like so. Then before pulling the gathering stitches, what we want to do is connect the 2 side seams of the sleeve together, then select the 2 top threads and gently pull these, and it should start gathering in that material. Now you want to pull the gather and even it out as much as is required. Before sewing the rest of the sleeves, we need to create the ties for the edge of the sleeves. So what I'm doing here is taking the strip of fabric and making some like bias binding. So what you want to do is fold one edge towards the halfway part of the width, and then repeat this with the other edge so that you have 2 edges folded into the middle. Then what you want to do once you have that, I'm doing this by eye actually, not using a bias binder maker. Then you want to fold this in half so the 2 folded pieces are inside, it conceals all the raw edges, and then sewing along that open edge as close to the edge as possible to create these straps. And there is a part in the straps that you leave unsewn because this part will then be attached to the sleeves. The open part of the straps then go around the bottom edge of that sleeve where the gathering stitches are, and you just want to gather these stitches so that it all fits in. And you can see there is some gathering stitching showing, but that's okay because this will be pulled out and removed later because it is only a temporary stitch. Then it's time to move on to the top part of the sleeve and attaching this to the dress. So where the armholes are of the bodice part of the dress, you then want to pin the sleeve round into this, again pulling them gathering sleeves at the top so that it all fits in, and it may look a little bit bulky at the top part of the shoulder because this is where the gathers are going to be. Then all you want to do is do a stitch all the way around to join the 2 together. So it's the next day and the dress is really taking shape. So the sleeves are now in. I've just finished off the tie bits at the end just by folding them over, and it's all set in. Now I did have a little bit of problems with the fitting of this, so I've had to take the shoulders down about so much, so I've had to re-sew the shoulder seam, take out the sleeves and re-put them back in, and I think I cut quite a bit off of it, but I think I made a size bigger than my measurements, just so I had extra to play with, because it's always better to make it bigger than too small. So I've taken that in. There's still a little bit of problems with the side seams here. I've sort of done that a little bit wrong, but I can rectify that. So yesterday I spent a lot of the day unpicking a lot of stuff and then resewing and unpicking and resewing. So I didn't film that because I didn't think that would be interesting, but that's just a word of warning with this pattern. You may need to adjust it a little bit. So now the final bit to do is sew on the buttonholes to the facing and then sew on the buttons, finishing it off with a hem, and the dress is more or less ready. So let's get to buttonholing. To sew the buttonholes, I am just using a buttonhole foot. I think that's what it's called. So I'm just taking off the presser foot and replacing it with the buttonhole one here. So the buttonholes are on the facing, so I've popped them markings onto the left hand side of the front facing bit, and I picked up these really cute little yellow daisy flower type buttons, and I thought they'd just go so lovely with this dress. So what I've done is did a centre point of where the buttons were on the facing, and then just placed my button there as a rough guide of how big I need the buttonhole to be, so that can fit through perfectly. That one is a little bit too long there, so I'm just going to make sure that bit is marked. That's better. So let's get on to doing this. My sewing machine and most sewing machines have a buttonhole stitching setting. So mine is a dial that you change up to do the tops and bottom as well as the sides. So I've just gone ahead and done this and sewn 9 buttonholes because this dress calls for 9. Oh my goodness, there's so many. You can alternate where you want the buttons to be, but I wanted to follow the pattern. And then I am just using a seam ripper to open up the buttonhole. So placing this down and then using the blade type bit of the seam ripper to cut through the fabric to open up that buttonhole. Then I did test the buttons, and if the buttonhole was too big, I would go back in and resew it to make it a bit smaller, and if the buttonhole was too large, I'd just re-stitch a bit and then cut out some of that stitching that had already been done. And then the final thing to do with the buttonholes is attach the buttons. So I've just marked where the buttons need to go through the buttonholes, and then using a hand sewing needle and thread and just attaching these, making sure that they are thoroughly secure so that I can button up the dress. To finish off the dress, I did a rolled hem along the bottom edge and give everything a quick press together, and then the tea dress / Etoile dress was complete.
I want to be daring, baby, dance the night away. I let my hair down if I want. Don't you just get tired chasing fame and being pretty all the time? Doesn't sound like fun. You can do better. Let me show you what a good time looks like. You can do better, so much better. I don't fit into your box, beauty queens without no flaws. You can do better. I dare you to be wilder. I don't fit into your box, beauty queens without no flaws. You can do better.
They have how to sew a tea dress using the Etoile pattern by French Poetry, and it is a beautiful sewing pattern to work with. I did have a little bit of trouble with it, and I spread out the sewing of this over a few days, so I wasn't trying to cram it all into one day. And I did make the dress in a slightly larger size than my measurements called for, just so that I could then tailor it in, and I did have to do a lot of tailoring on the top half especially. Now I have a bit of a problem with necklines. I don't know if you can see, this is a bought dress and it does sort of sag a bit on the neckline, so I do have to alter stuff, which is the beauty of being able to sew your own clothes, I guess. And I just did this at the wrong stage in the project, so instead of doing it at the pattern piece stage, I did it once I had sewn it together. But you know, you live and learn. So if you have any tips and tricks on altering pattern pieces and clothing, then do put them in them comments, because no matter how long you have been sewing, there's always something new to learn. And I have been sewing a while, but I am not an expert, and I can put things together, but there's odd techniques that I need to learn and do a bit better with. So if you have any, please do share them in them comments. And if you've enjoyed the video, then please do give it a big thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to keep up with more of my creative and crafty antics coming up onto the channel. And whilst you're there, hit that notification bell, because that will alert you each time my videos go live. I also have a blog, Ames's Antics, which is linked down below and up above, because sometimes the blog has a little bit more information than I do put in the video, so be sure to check that out. And with that said, I will see you in next week's video, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and week, and I will see you in the next one. Happy crafting! Bye!